paint a picture of my upbringing, I was raised in a very small little village. It had no more than 18 houses.
You've built 2 multi-7-figure businesses. How important the person you're hiring to have a college degree?
I don't think we even screen for it or look for it. I've always challenged the rules. In entrepreneurship is a good mindset to have. To be truly exceptional at something, you have to give up almost everything else. You can do anything you want, but you can't do everything you want.
What is the high performance mindset?
I would say it's...
James Reynolds is the founder and CEO of SEO Sharper. In this episode, we spoke about how he managed to move to Dubai, start up a company, and then build it to become a 7-figure business. We spoke about his childhood and his aspirations growing up. And we also spoke about SEO, search engine optimization, and its impact on your company. This episode has a lot of discussion on cultivating the right mindset. Do not miss out on this one. All right, before we kick off with today's episode, if you can do me the small favor and subscribe to this channel, I'd highly appreciate it, and it'll help me bring you more and more high performers to this show. This is the High Performance Mindset, and today's guest is James Reynolds. Enjoy this episode.
James, welcome to HPM.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, Hisham.
You've built 2 multi-7-figure businesses. I wanted to ask you, when it comes to hiring, how important is the person you're hiring to have a college degree?
Well, in our case, I don't think we even screen for it or look for it these days. There's far better ways to understand someone's attributes and their fit within the organization than a piece of paper that they may have got out of college or school, often many years ago. So not something that we look at particularly closely these days.
So what do you look at?
Well, we look at whether someone has done what we want them to do in the business before. I think there's a big case for prior performance is the best predictor of future success, but also cultural fit is extremely important. How are they going to gel with the other people in the organization to maximize performance? And having those right sort of collective traits that blend really well is exceptionally important when you're building a high performance team.
All right, so from one side, you'd prefer if the person can showcase the projects they worked on.
Yeah.
That will give you a good idea of the experiences and capabilities. And from the other end, which you really emphasized on, is the cultural fit. So for you, what do you look at for a person that you feel would fit in with the culture of your company?
Yeah, so we have established a core set of core values that we both hire for, and then we occasionally cut smartly around as well. So within SEO Sharper, we have, as I said, 5. One is serious fun. We want people that are really serious and focused around their area of expertise, but also they're just a little bit lighthearted and they're just good fun to work with.
Why is that important?
For us, we want to enjoy going into work each day. We want to enjoy the environment that we're in, the people that we are around, and creating an environment that people really look forward to being a part of is exceptionally important.
I mean, usually people can misread one or the other.
Yep.
Right? So either if they see you too serious that you wouldn't, or really good at what you do that you wouldn't have the fun side.
Yeah.
Or the other way around, that if you're very playful or you joke around a lot, that you would be good at what you do. So how do you tell if a person is good at both?
Well, I mean, in terms of whether they're good at their role or the work that they're being hired to do, that's all based upon testing and application, right? It's actually trialing them on the stuff that they would do within the role should they join us. In terms of the kind of the fun sort of softer sort of cultural element stuff, we have a whole culture fit interview process where we ask a lot of questions that kind of unearth the real person behind the professional demeanor.
Interesting.
And there's a interesting process that we have that which we can dive into a little bit. But we're really looking for, people that are like full of energy, that are joyful, that have interests beyond, their core line of work, and can bring something to the organization that probably isn't there already within the company. So we can get a more broader sort of cultural diversity, a greater set of opinions, backstories, ways of thinking to really, grow the organization as a whole.
The set of questions that you've set up, you feel they've been accurate to a certain extent?
The cultural fit process has failed us very infrequently. It's hard to get through that process and, as we call them, be a brilliant jerk that are exceptional at what they do, just not fun to be around. So we've refined them, over a long period of time. The agency's been operating for 12 years now, and that whole process has been tweaked and refined incrementally as we've been in business. But we find it, it's pretty good. We have an overall 6-stage interview process, so it's pretty difficult to get through that whole process and to have performed your way through and then get in the job and be a completely different person to the one that showed up during the interview process itself. Yeah.
Through those 6 stages, you would start seeing different sides of the person.
Yeah. It's very difficult to perform consistently in interview mode 6 times over with potentially 6 different interview committee members, and fall your way through the process.
Just very, thinking very out loud, like if throughout the 6 stages you're dealing with the same person, then you'd get accustomed to them. Maybe you'd become more comfortable, and that would help show your true side.
Yeah.
Rather than every time a new person where, you're tensed and, like in the interview. So do you have different team members attending those 6 different stages, or do you have the same person interviewing them?
Yeah, so there's normally one person that will lead multiple sessions, but we always ensure that there's at least one new face that comes as part of a later session. So typically the way it works, especially for kind of executive leadership level roles, is we'll have an interview committee that lead the first phases, and it's typically the hiring manager who will handle most of those sessions. So especially the initial chemistry call, as we call it, where it's just really a matter of sort of getting to know the candidate getting to know us, hiring manager that's on that, they're assessing the candidate. They may then be involved with other hiring committee members later on, but typically it's the hiring manager that then leads the longer sessions. I will typically come in at the last stage, and I am intentionally difficult in those sessions. Like I want to challenge a candidate, because at that stage, to your point, they have probably got very comfortable with the hiring manager and the other people they've been interfacing with. There should be good rapport, nice, relaxed relationships, a calmness. You would know your interview committee pretty well at that stage. I come in just to be a little bit difficult at the end, just to really then like snap the candidate out of that current state and challenge them and see how they hold up. And if they can hold up in that environment along with the other stages, then we know we've got someone that's pretty good.
Interesting. I listened to one of the co-founders of Snapchat, and he was saying that it wasn't initially what they were always or consistently look for while hiring, but right now they're looking for kind, creative. I really can't recall. It's 3 attributes, but kindness was there.
Yeah,
which is like saying competent, kind, and I don't know what was the third. But
I know that's central to their culture at Snapchat. Kindness is probably one of their core values, I believe. Yeah, integral to what they do and how they operate.
Would that be the same for you, or you feel it's not applicable for the culture?
Yeah, I would say that we are an organization that is very people focused, and therefore kindness runs through like how we interact with our team. but our values play out in a slightly different way. And I think values are really the blueprint for an organization. They're essentially laying down a marker of this is who we are and this is how we think and interact as a group. And getting people that align with that is incredibly important. I think just distilling that down and being able to document it will attract the right sort of people. And every organization has a culture, but they're probably not necessarily aware of what that culture is unless they've gone through the process of really distilling it down and sort of metamorphosizing it into some form of kind of documentation that everyone agrees upon.
So how would you describe your culture, the values of your culture?
Yeah, so it will live out in a number of the values. So I've mentioned serious fun is one aspect. The other or another is open for business. So we lead with radical transparency. Everyone has access to all business information within the company, down to the most minute sort of data, so they can understand really how the business is operating. They can make decisions effectively because they have access to the right sort of information, and that also builds a very high trust organization because everyone has access to everything. You've got to be very comfortable with everyone knowing everything, which is pretty difficult to come to terms with sometimes as a business owner.
Of course, yeah. So yes, of course, you have a part of you would be telling you, do you sure you want to share that much? And then someone else runs away with it? Or what's the benefit of what you just mentioned is if you do share, then you build trust. Mm-hmm. And what's the benefit of building that trust?
Yeah, I think everyone wants to feel that they have ownership. And if they are to have ownership, they must be able to make decisions as an owner would, which means they must have access to the information that would allow them to make confident decisions and know the direction that they are moving forward in is the right one for the organization. It creates a huge amount of speed because if you don't have to go through rigorous layers of approvals and sign-offs, but you can actually transfer decision making down to the front line, then that means the organization can move at a much faster pace than when you've got layers of bureaucracy in place. So we try and have a sort of day one thinking mindset and remain as agile as possible. There are, of course, sort of secondary benefits. If someone has ownership, they're more likely to have longevity in the business because they feel like they are building something. So that helps with minimizing turnover, helps us as an organization think much more long term, reduce overheads because we're not having to rehire. But most importantly, we create an environment that people are really proud of because they feel like it's their own. And I think that's super, super imperative to us.
Amazing. All right, let's rewind back the clock a little bit. You grew up in a artistic family. Authors, writers, musicians. What was your routine like after school? Let's say between your age 7 to 12.
So I'll paint a picture of my upbringing. I was raised in a very small little village in the centre of England. The village was called Lawton, and it had no more than 18 houses. It was tiny. You knew everyone in the village. Everyone knew what was going on, and it was extremely rural, as you might imagine. So there was not a lot there. There was just houses, and surrounding that there was fields. Cows grazing, horses in the fields. You can just imagine it. Very quintessential English countryside. And because of that, I had a huge amount of freedom as a child. After school, would come home, have a quick snack, and then I would be out playing on the streets, probably with a ball or a bike or exploring, climbing stuff. That was typically my sort of early evenings at that sort of age. Very small friendship set because there was very few other children in a village of 18 houses, especially those that might have been of a similar age. So yeah, one or two other children in the village that I play with, my sister who's a couple of years older as well. But just the sense of freedom is what I remember most about my childhood. I was extremely naughty too. I got up to all sorts of mischief, which we probably don't want to go into on a podcast.
Is that where you got the scar?
I have actually. I was joking with my team yesterday because we were all sort of sharing a few things that other members of the team may not have known. I was in and out of hospital a lot as a child. No joke. At certain periods, it was almost like I was in and out of hospital every couple of weeks. No illnesses, just stupid accidents. So this one here was me falling off a bike. I cracked my chin open trying to cycle on sheet ice. I fell out of a car 3 times, I believe. Broke my wrist.
Fell out of a car?
Fell out of a car, yeah.
I want to ask why, but okay.
I think the first instance was by accident. My dad, as you pointed out, was a writer, and he wrote a lot on motoring history and various vehicle brands. He was a sort of car renovation hobbyist. So we always had these beautiful old Citroen vehicles, some of them that were, classics, let's say. So he would, sort of make these vehicles up, rebuild them. And because he'd rebuilt them themselves, maybe the doors weren't always latched on properly. So the first time was just me kind of leaning on a door and then falling out of it. The second time it occurred was because my parents had reminded me of the first time that I had leant on the door and fallen out of the car. And I'm like, no, it won't happen. I promise you it won't happen if I lean on the door. And of course I was trying to prove a point and then prove them right, not myself. So this was the type of child I was. I think it's quite interesting sometimes being a little bit retrospective. I've always sort of pushed back on authority, or let's say challenged the rules, which in entrepreneurship is probably a good mindset to have. I'm not breaking any rules that I shouldn't be, but I'm definitely challenging, should the things be done in the way that we're told that they should be done, or perhaps is there other ways of doing things? And that's always been a mindset. Quite how it materialized when I was in my early childhood, I'm not quite sure, but I think it's definitely been a kind of a mindset or an approach to life that I've carried through into my later years, for sure.
I definitely see a clear link with the other things you did in life.
Yeah.
Very clearly.
Yeah.
And you telling me the story just cements that thought. All right, so on a less rebellious side, you were in school, you were the captain for the rugby team. So how did that happen?
Rugby was something that my parents got me into quite young. I believe they took me down to the local rugby club when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, something like that. They'd always followed it. My father grew up in Wales, which is the country for rugby, or at least it was back in the sort of 70s and 80s. So they'd always envisaged me playing that sport, and I fell in love with it from day one. I loved the challenge of the sport. I loved the physicality. I loved the teamwork. I loved getting muddy and dirty, playing on the pitches. And it's something that I was good at, I think I was quite sort of bloody minded, was okay with putting myself through pain and getting bumped and hurt.
They assigned you as the captain of the team?
Very, very early. So I played in the local club, and I think I was made captain in the second season. And then that was something that then carried through, all the way through, really. So both at club level and then school, and then when I went on to kind of competitive professional level, the professional club that I was signed to, I was made captain at the younger age groups as well. So I think that is definitely the through line for leadership, and me now being in an environment where I'm sort of leading and developing a team, but of a different sort, of course, nowadays. But it definitely was seeded in my days of playing sport as a young child. Yeah.
Do you remember what feedback your coach used to give you, or at least did he give you tell you the reason why he put you as the captain?
I don't recall any direct feedback at the time. I think if I was to hazard a guess based upon sort of comments and general feedback I got, through my early playing days was really because I set an example for others. I was disciplined, so I would never miss a training session. I would always turn up on time. I would put my all into the training exercises, and I would give my all for the team as well. I really wanted to succeed, and would try and set the standards and the barometer for what that looked like for the rest of the team to follow.
Where do you feel you learned that from?
It's a good question. I think my father had a lot to do with that. He was a freelancer for as long as I can remember. So he'd worked in big advertising agencies, but I think must have been before I was 10. As long as I can remember, he was then a freelance writer. So his success was built upon his own level of effort and the opportunities that he created for himself. And because, when I come back from school, he would be there working hard. I could see him at his computer, producing his latest manuscript, writing his latest ads. I could see the work ethic that was in him, and I could see that he was responsible for all of his own success. He was not taking a free ride on an organization. He was in there, creating for himself. So I think that work ethic I definitely picked up from him. I think also secondary to that, I've always been a reasonably strong communicator, so I could put points across to others and sort of motivate and guide effectively. And I think that's also quite an important skill when you're in a leadership role. You need to be able to distill that message down to get other people on board. And I was probably reasonably good at that as a child as well, and that's for sure from him. I mean, he's a writer, so he's always very good with words.
And when did you playing the saxophone come?
Yeah, that also started very early. That was mostly influenced from my mother's side. She played violin, her sister played the cello, but her father, my grandfather, who I never met, was a professional musician. He himself played the saxophone, the clarinet and the violin, and he toured all over the world as a pro musician. So they always wanted me to play some form of instrument, and I had always thought the saxophone was a pretty cool instrument. Like, of everything that I could play, watched jazz bands and could see the soloist, playing the sax, and I thought that was pretty cool always. So I started off on the clarinet, which is how most wind instrument players will start if they're thinking of progressing to the saxophone, and then eventually started the sax when I was a little older, and then progressed with that, through various bands and so on and so forth. Can you
recall your learning stages?
Yeah. So I had a tutor, which was how music was taught in the schooling system. They didn't call them peripatetic teachers, and they were sort of touring teachers that would go around the schools, and they would be, instrument specialists. So there would be, typically a clarinet teacher and a violin teacher, and they would go around the schools, and those that wanted to take lessons would have those lessons sponsored through the county council. So quite an influential figure for me was my saxophone teacher, Mr. Lloyd. Me and him always got on great because we had a love for jazz music. which is something that my dad had sort of weaned me on from a young age. Had the most incredible jazz music collection, all on vinyl, of course. And he also loved rugby. So half of the time that I would go in to have my lessons, we just talked about rugby, and then we'd fit in a little bit of clarinet at the end. So he was someone that I look back on extremely fondly, and he mentored me extensively and sort of encouraged me to progress in the saxophone, and eventually put me into the position of lead alto saxophone player in like the sort of county schools jazz band, which was something that I really enjoyed. I continued to play until I was probably at the end of school, and then like a lot of things sort of slipped by the wayside thereafter.
How would you describe his way of teaching?
I think he was great for me because he understood what made me tick, and how he taught me was probably very different to how he taught other people. And I say that because there would be multiple classes that would happen in schools, and you would sort of overhear how other students were being taught and where they were up to. And he was, I think, more kind of disciplined with them than he was with me. He understood that sort of rule of sort of hard knocks of being on top of someone probably wasn't how I was going to respond effectively. So he just really tried to sort of guide and encourage me, and just point me in the right direction, help me see from myself where I need to progress to, and leave me then to do it, and just give me the encouragement along the way.
And playing an instrument on that level, like for a band, especially jazz, you have to be disciplined because it requires a lot of practice. You just have to constantly be on top of it and sharpening your axe. Do you see a link there with maybe the same time that you were playing for Northampton Saints? Because going from school to now semi-professional, was there a different structure in the rugby team? I had to really make a decision at that sort of stage what direction I went in, and I think music suffered over the sport and the rugby. That was really my passion. How did you deal with that?
I mean, the music I just allowed to tick on. I kind of did as much as I could get away with doing, or as little as I could get away with doing, probably at that stage. And I think that's, we soon realize as well later in life, if you want to be truly exceptional at something, then you do have to make decisions. You can do anything you want, but you can't do everything that you want. And that was certainly the case then. And as the workload and the training increased, and the requirements in order to be at the top of your game grew in rugby, then music had to take a second seat if that was the choice that I wanted to make. So towards the end of my schooling, I mean, the amount of training that I was having to do, the requirements, also just for personal practice and skill development increased, and I had very little time for anything else really at that stage.
And how did the coach deal with you as a captain of the team?
I had some fantastic coaches really throughout my rugby playing days, many that I could cite, and typically as you go through different age group levels, there will be different team managers, different coaches who are there to develop you onto the next stage, and that requires, of course, different skill sets and different backgrounds. The coaches always really championed me. I was always struggling a little bit in rugby because I didn't necessarily have the physical attributes that the top players certainly nowadays have, and professional rugby players are typically now, all 6 foot and built like wrestlers, like huge guys, and I'm not that. I'm 5'8", 5'8.5" on a good day. So I definitely didn't have the physical kind of attributes to really exceed at the highest level, but I got around it through sort of strategy and understanding the game and developing my skill set and compromising for that in different areas. So the coaches would always sort of guide me and advise me and direct me in those sorts of areas. They also really encouraged me to try my hand at different positions. So when I started out in rugby, I was what is referred to as a flanker, basically on the side of the scrum. Really, it's a brutal position, a lot of endurance work. You're there at the breakdown winning the ball, but you also need to be quite big. And whilst I was really good at that position, to get to the next level, I probably again didn't have the physical attributes, to do that. So they encouraged me then to try my hand at different positions within the team to apply my skill sets in perhaps areas where I could be more effective. Fond days.
Can you describe from each of the coaches that you worked with, at least one thing that you learned from each of them?
So I would start, there was a guy called Richard Woodford. His son also played in the team as well, and he was a real student of the game. And I learned from him that you need to really study the ins and the outs. If you can know the game better than anyone else, then you've got a much stronger chance of being successful. And he used to go and watch every single game of rugby he could possibly watch, and this is in pre-YouTube days, as you can imagine. So it would all be live. We'd go and watch the local professional team, Leicester, and if Northampton were playing on the next day, he'd also go and watch them. He'd go and watch midweek games. He was trying to expose himself to as much rugby as possible to get different insights, to see different ways of playing the game, to see different moves and tactics, and he brought all of that back, and he encouraged the players to do that. So I remember taking a lot of road trips with him and his son to go and watch different games and see different teams doing things in different ways. The next one that I can recall particularly was a guy called Dave Palethorpe. He was the sort of regional development officer, so he would kind of take players from the junior clubs and he would progress them into the professional clubs, and he would really encourage playing with a lot of freedom, and would encourage, in the same way that Richard encouraged stewardship of rugby, he encouraged stewardship of other sports. So he would often point us to sports like basketball in terms of looking at how plays are run, or even how balls are passed. So typically a rugby ball is passed across the body from left to right, and he would be showing us how basketball players are doing little pops over the top and pops behind the back, and taking a lot from other sports, which I thought was really kind of innovative, and it just widened the skill set. And if you can see the game in ways that others don't, because you're exposing yourself to different sports entirely, then that's really beneficial as well. And then I had just other coaches, Matt, who was the coach at Saints when I joined them. He just really drilled into me just like the level of application and discipline that's required if you really want to succeed
at a professional level.
It's just like, whatever you're doing right now, you've got to go 5 levels up, and
how do you achieve that?
Well, through a huge amount of discipline. And that at that point I realized that choices had to be made. As a sort of 17-year-old, sort of getting into going out and clubs and partying and girls and those sorts of things, if I really wanted to succeed, then I probably had to make different choices to most of my friendship group, right? So they really sort of laid out for us what was important to be professional, and that was when rugby was just turning professionals in the first 2 or 3 years of it being a true professional sport. Things have come on a long way now, in the later years, and what's required, I'm sure, of someone at my age back then now would be steps above what was being asked of us, back in 1998, 1999 is how far back I'm talking.
Did you dream of becoming a professional rugby player?
Yeah, it was my dream. Yeah. Yeah. And I sometimes look back retrospectively and like, well, what could I have done, differently to have that dream fulfilled? And I think there's certainly a level of disappointment that I didn't succeed in that. But at the same time, the path that I have taken, I think, is also a true blessing, because most of my friends who did make it out of the Saints team, they didn't make a lot of money at the time. It was when the sport had just turned professional, and they've all gone into areas of business since then. So now the way I look at it is I actually got probably a 10-year head start on everyone else. So that itself is something to be thankful for.
So at what stage was there a point where you made a clear decision that, okay, now I'm going to put my energy elsewhere?
Honestly, it was really made for me. So as a 19-year-old, I was released to go and play at another club. So what they do sometimes through the sort of youth apprenticeship program is they'll then say, right, we need to give you more game time to ensure that you're actually developing your skills in real life game environments. And for me, this was at the time when I was actually transitioning from one position to another, so I needed to go and get that game time elsewhere. And when that happened, you go to a club that's probably a level or two down in terms of sort of skill development, quality of rugby that they're playing. And when I took that step down, I just didn't enjoy it anymore. I was like, and I found other things that that excited me at that particular time. So I sort of gradually just fell out of the sport. I think there was also probably a realization for me that at that stage I maybe didn't have everything that was required to really succeed in rugby. So I started to kind of explore other options in my mind and take a different path. Yeah.
You started art and design in uni.
Yeah.
Did you complete?
No, I also didn't complete twice.
You went back and then you still...
I went back and then I also didn't complete, yeah.
What was your experience like?
So the course that I took was like a pre-degree course. They call it a foundation year in art and design. And they do it in art and design because when you are doing art or design at school, you don't really have a direction into one of the disciplines, which could be fine art, or it could be product design, or it could be graphic design. They do this sort of generalist year where you cover all aspects to then really see what area you want to develop in degree format. So I did that at De Montfort University, which was close by to where I went to school.
Why did you pick art and design out of all degrees?
Because I really enjoy building and creating things.
Okay.
I think that's definitely something that's sort of been passed down to me from my mum, who was an artist. And I always really enjoyed it. I'm very dexterous. I'm good with my hands. Like, I was always good at woodwork. I'm reasonable at art and drawing. And I enjoyed it very much. And I think I took that course because still at that time was when I was playing sport. So I was like, one of these two things has got to work. I'm either going to go into kind of phys ed and sports, or I'm going to go into art and design. Let's kind of hedge my bets a little bit. And I decided on the art and design aspect. But as I said, I went through the first year, and in the first year was still kind of when I was in my rugby phase. So I spent most of the time in the gym, not so much time in class. Yeah. And so I got towards the end of that I think third semester, and I took the decision, okay, if I really want to do well here, I should probably come back and start afresh and begin again. So I chose to go back for the second year. And then in the second year, it became very clear to me that I no longer enjoyed the education process, and I just wanted to work. I wanted to apply myself in, a business environment. I wanted to earn money. I wanted to get out into the real world, and couldn't imagine myself doing another 3 or 4 years in the education system.
At that time?
At this time, I would have been 19. Yeah.
That's pretty much about the same time I started working.
Yeah.
So where does photography come in? Like, you've always been into photography, or where did that come in?
So photography was something that came up in the foundation course for art and design, and it was something that I enjoyed very much. So as I was in this sort of decision period of, well, shall I continue with this foundation program, or shall I go out and get work? A job opportunity came up in my local area, which any form of good job opportunity coming up in my local area needs to be taken notice of, because it was, as I said, it was a small sort of rural area, and a photographer who'd just moved to the local area, who was very well established, very well known, extremely well credentialized. He'd been the UK Photographer of the Year and so on and so forth, and had opened up a studio in the town local to me, and was advertising for just a general assistant. And I thought, this sounds fantastic. This sounds exactly up my street. I can learn on the job, I can do photography, and I can start from the ground up. So I applied for that job, went to interview. I didn't get a call back for months, and my dad would remind me of that and said, what's happening with this photographer? And I'm like, they've not called me back. I don't think I've got it. He then encouraged me to, follow up and give the business a call. And when I called back a second time, I kind of reminded them of the interview. And I don't know if that was the reason for it, but I think later down the line, they said, look, the fact that you followed up and were hungry for it was the reason we thought we'd give you a chance. And they hired me as their first full-time employee in the small town of Market Harborough. And I started off as a photographer's assistant, carrying bags, holding reflectors, framing portraits, making cups of tea, these types of things, and eventually worked my way up and helped grow that business. Yeah.
And that grew into a 50 plus staff business, which at the time it was how many people?
Well, when I joined, it was 2. It was a husband and his wife, who'd just relocated from the south of England to, central Leicestershire, and I was the first full-time employee. So started off as the 3 of us. When I left that business, we were close to 55, maybe 60 people.
So how did that 3 people business scale up to 50 plus? Like, can you share with us how was the scaling process, and what was your learning curve there?
Yeah, I would say that, the first several years, still based in Market Harborough in Leicestershire, England, was really just like product refinement and service refinement. It's just getting better at what we did, refining the sales process, the marketing messaging, basically how we went to market. The growth was consistent. We acquired more customers. The returns that we got from those customers increased, but still we were operating in a very small market area. The catchment was, the village is local to us, people within a 25-mile radius, and there's also a lot of competition there. Many people doing photography. The growth of that business was really capped by its geographic location.
Before you moved to another geographic location, what do you feel the thing that you guys were doing right, at least in your town?
The product was exceptional compared to what else was on offer. Yeah. The quality and also just the identity of the business was extremely refined. So we had a real focus on what you might describe as sort of fine art, black and white portraiture. So it was mostly family portraits. I'm talking, families, kids, couples, these types of things. But it was done in this really sort of classic black and white style that was quite unique back then. It was also at that stage all traditional darkroom techniques. So it had a certain kind of mystique to it, a certain sort of just a certain quality to feel, both in terms of how things were printed, how they were framed, etc. It was a very refined, high-end product that we put out.
And it was very clear that this is what you're going to get when you come to us.
Yeah. It was a visual identity.
Versus you can have a variety of way of editing and processing the pictures you take.
Yeah. I mean, you came to us for that style of portrait, and it became very aspirational. People wanted to have a Stu Williamson portrait on their walls because it would say a certain thing about them as a family. If they could afford to get one, if they would have the taste and understanding that is a good quality portrait, that also depicts a lot about them as a group. So we were really focused on the sort of high end, luxury end of the market.
What did you take from that stage?
Well, I mean, it taught me a lot about branding. Taught me a lot about branding. It taught me a lot about spatial design, the environment in which we brought people, in the environment in which they had their photographs taken, the environment in which they chose their photographs influence a lot their choices and how much they would spend on their portraits. So we put a lot of attention into how the studio was set up and the decor, and it felt like a quality environment.
Right.
So that's something that definitely has carried through into the business that I do these days. Just how things look, information that we send, how we package it, the office that we bring people to. We want to create an environment that is aspirational, that people really want to be a part of, and that's definitely something that I learned in my kind of photography days for sure. Marketing was a big thing. I learned a lot in those early days about direct response marketing. I didn't know it was called that at the time, but we had a marketing consultant there. It's funny how these sort of connections pass through, but a guy called Steve Hackney, he was also a rugby player. And played for England. So as soon as we brought him into the business, like he and I got on like a house on fire, and he also mentored me a lot in sort of advertising and marketing techniques. And he was a big student, I realize now, of Dan Kennedy, who's a very well-known direct response marketer. And meeting him was really what got me interested in the marketing path that I've since taken, and to sort of maybe close a loop on that whole sort of photography period. I joined that photography business because I wanted to be a photographer, but very quickly I think they identified that my skill set was in the sort of advertising, marketing, sales, acquisition side of the business, which is then what they tasked me with. And that was really then my focus for the 10 years that I was there, was helping build acquisition engines that would bring in new customers and get customers spending more, and so on and so forth, which is transferred into now what I do these days, which is an agency and a marketing agency.
So when you stepped out of the little town, what are the things you had to start doing differently to at least so the first thing you guys did, open up another office, another studio in another town, or still operating from the same studio? How did you go about it?
So our big move, and the reason that I'm here, is that our second studio was Dubai.
Right.
I really don't know the provenance of Dubai in the whole story, but I know at one stage, Stu and his wife Karina, they then went on a little sort of tour, and they looked at Dubai and they looked at Singapore, and then came back very excitedly after they'd been to Dubai, which I guess that first visit was probably around 2004, maybe 2005, probably. Not 2004. Yes, 2004. Just trying to connect the years. And they really loved the place. They knew some people here. We knew some clients that we did some work for in the UK that had moved to Dubai and said great things about it. And I think they were looking for some change as well. And at that time, Dubai was in its early growth period, and there wasn't really an offering like ours within the city. And we realized there was an opportunity for us to take the product, take the brand that we'd established in the UK and, set it up here in Dubai. And that's what we did. So in 2006, we moved over. I helped launch the studio, and I stayed with that business for a few more years thereafter.
What are the things that, when you moved from England to Dubai, that you felt you wish you got here?
Things that I perhaps missed from the UK that were not present in Dubai. I think my earliest memories were just the things that were difficult here at that time. So I remember, sort of document processing and licensing and all those sorts of things, way back at, sort of early 2000s was not the smooth process it was then. So, we had some sort of challenging periods early days. I remember the studio which we opened on Beach Road was powered by a generator for the first 6 months because DWAR was still not connected. So you could not imagine that happening now, but back then that was probably quite normal, just because the infrastructure wasn't in place then, as it certainly is now, and just things took longer. Didn't operate with the level of efficiency that the UK operated in. I think that table has well and truly turned now. I think you would compare the UK and go, geez, why can't they be as efficient as Dubai? They've absolutely taken over the UK now, but back then it was quite different.
And then, okay, on the flip side, since over 10 years, it's been over a decade that you've been here.
Yeah.
So what kept you in Dubai? What is it that you like so much about Dubai?
Many things. I would say at the core of it, Dubai has evolved continuously over that nearly 20 years now that I've been here, and because it has evolved, it's always maintained a certain level of kind of freshness. So it's difficult to get bored here because the city this year is an evolution of the city last year. So many new things opening, that it's you shouldn't get too bored here. I just also like the mindset of the leadership. I like the mindset of the people that Dubai attracts as a city. It's inspiring to be able to observe the things that happen and meet great individuals that are doing great things. And, that level of kind of positivity, that level of forward thinking, that type of sort of go-gettedness that you get in Dubai is infectious. And I think that has been a reason for me sort of wanting to, continuously be here and make it my home.
And then how in 2012 did you decide, all right, I will start an SEO agency? It wasn't the most trending line of business that entrepreneurs start in. It's a very niche, very important, but still not the most trending
I think
type of agency you would open.
Yeah, even online in general was still in its sort of infancy back then. So I made the sort of actual switch to my consultancy in 2010, and then sort of SEO Sharper, my current agency, sort of evolved out of that by 2012. The reason I originally made the sort of call to go it alone was because I had been introduced to this whole new world of making money online that I did not know existed, and that came about through an introduction and an attendance at an event. And I was listening to all of these speakers who were making the laptop living. They were telling stories of vacationing around the world and traveling and making money on their laptops doing affiliate marketing, and that was a dream that I aspired to. I thought I'd love to be doing that.
A lot of people would see that and shy off.
Yeah, possibly. I think for me, because of the sort of paid traineeship that I had working inside someone else's business, I felt that I was equipped to go it alone. And I think that was a real blessing. I had learned entrepreneurship whilst being in a job. I felt I had all the skills necessary, and probably also had a mindset that I can do things better. I felt that I could apply myself more effectively than perhaps the current business that I was in had bigger ideas or greater aspirations. So no, it didn't scare me at all. The line or direction of what I thought I was going to be doing and what I ended up doing changed quite a lot. So my mindset originally was, I'm going to be selling, affiliate products via traffic arbitrage, by putting up these websites selling, I don't know, hosting plans or workout books or protein powders. This was my idea of just selling other people's products through sort of traffic arbitrage. But I realized very quickly that very difficult to make money that way. So got directed into doing local consultancy, which was essentially taking those skills that I was starting to learn about online marketing and applying them to local businesses. And that's essentially what I started with. Started selling websites and traffic services and social media management and these sorts of things to local businesses in Dubai, most of whom I had made connections with through my former profession. So, clients that we'd worked with there or connections that I'd made. And when I did make that switch, I just went back to those relationships and said, look, I'm now doing this whole online marketing thing. I think I can help you. Do you want support with generating more customers, via a website? And that's how I got my first clients.
From all the online businesses, like why, or web related, why did you specifically pick SEO?
SEO...
it's not the only service you provide, but
now it's the core service. We do a lot around that, but sort of technical SEO, as we might describe it these days, is definitely the core product. I love SEO because it is a perfect balance of data and creativity. So on one side you have got like technical aspects, data-driven decision making, very much like left brain type work. And on the other side, you've got creative marketing, creative content development, which is very much like right brain thinking. And that's really me. About the artistic background, but I was also, very good at maths when I was in school, and it allowed me to do both of those two things within one core discipline, which was right up my street. I enjoyed it so much. I'm like, this is the area that I should really, double down on. And that's what I did.
You have 50 plus clients, and you've worked with Nissan, American Express, HSBC. The list goes on of all the giant companies. But for, let's say, entrepreneurs, content creators, why should they come to you?
Well,
or your type of line of work?
There is 45 billion searches per day across all search platforms, which is a huge amount of potential exposure. But more importantly, it's motivated decision makers that are using search engines to discover services, solutions. So as a traffic source, it is the highest converting of all traffic sources that you could possibly capture. There is a big shift though happening right now, and it's a move away from traditional search engines, so think Google, Yahoo, Bing and others, to an entire search universe. So if we think about our own search habits nowadays, we are probably turning to tools like ChatGPT and Perplexity, or even social search engines like TikTok or Instagram if we're looking for maybe a cafe or a restaurant to visit. If you propagate all of that search volume, as I said, 45 billion searches per day, which is a huge potential reach and volume of customers that you can get in front of.
And this would help a client not just how they show up on Google, but also throughout the other platforms, or is it just specifically on Google ranking?
Yeah, so we now would consider ourselves to be the leaders in search everywhere optimization. So it's a slight spin on the typical SEO name that you might be familiar with, which is search engine optimization. Really, search happens everywhere. So we are now also assisting customers with showing up on AI-driven search engines like ChatGPT and others. We're also supporting with discovery on Instagram, on TikTok, on Reddit, on Amazon, on YouTube. Wherever your customers are searching, our objective is to get you found. And that for different businesses is a different search ecosystem, depending on the type of product they have, their ideal customer profile, which of those different platforms is most important to them will change. Our objective is to get those brands in front of their customers where the real search volume is happening.
All right. And on a final note, from your perspective, what is the high performance mindset?
I would say it's the disciplined pursuit of excellence to both improve on prior results and your current level of capabilities. And I would think about that both from the standpoint of an individual, but also from the standpoint of a team. And a lot of my work nowadays is on improving team performance. And sometimes that may mean that the individual's performance has to take a back seat for the betterment of the overall organization. Many things come to mind when I think about high performance. I'm a big advocate of incremental gain theory, of the art of continuous improvement, looking each day at how you can do what you're doing just 1% better and seeing the compounding effect of that over time. And I'm also a really big advocate of less but better, this idea of essentialism, of really reducing it down to what is most important and putting all of your energy and focus in that area. And it's probably why I've ended up with a business that is focused around one core discipline, because I've really realized that to be truly exceptional at something, you have to give up almost everything else and really put your time and energy into one small defined area. And that's a huge sacrifice sometimes, but an enjoyable sacrifice. Is something that I have really taken a lot of pleasure in over the various years that I've been doing it.
Amazing. I wouldn't have said it any differently. So I agree with you. You want more in any area, you have to shed some weight from other areas.
Yeah.
To go further.
Yeah. I think, as we said earlier, you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything you want. And if you really truly want to excel, like you might imagine, a gold medal Olympian, they really have to put all of their energy into a very small focused area, and everything else has to take a back seat. So big advocate of that, and something that I try and apply as much as I possibly can.
Amazing. James, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this session.
Yeah, I had a blast. Really fun to reminisce about times gone by that I don't normally get the opportunity to. So thank you for this opportunity.
It was amazing.